was just his temporary wife, until he started getting jealous she was not supposed to matter. Not to him. Not to anyone in his world. Don't forget, he said coldly, adjusting his cufflinks without even looking at her. This marriage ends in 6 months. She forced a smile, even though her chest felt like it was caving in. Of course, Mr. Kang. It is just business. But then... Why was he holding her wrist so tightly when she tried to walk away? Seoul was beautiful in the way that heartbreak is beautiful. You admire it from a distance. You tell yourself it does not hurt. But the moment you let it get close, it takes everything from you. Amara knew this better than anyone. She stood outside the immigration office on a Tuesday morning, the kind of cold that bites through your coat and settles into your bones. Her hands were wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Her eyes were fixed on the letter she had read 7 times already. Visa extension denied, 3 words, 12 characters. And just like that, 2 years of her life in Seoul were about to become nothing. She breathed in slowly. Then out, she was not going to cry on a public street. Not today. Her name was Amara Osai, 28 years old, Nigerian by birth, stubborn by nature. She had come to Seoul with a single suitcase, a business plan, and a belief so fierce it almost embarrassed her now. She had believed she could build something here. A fashion brand, something that blended her Yoruba heritage with the clean, modern edge of Korean streetwear. And for a while, it had worked. Her small boutique in Mapogu had attracted attention. She had been featured in 2 independent fashion blogs. A buyer from a mid-sized department store had even reached out for a meeting. But then the factory she sourced from raised their prices without warning. Then the exchange rate shifted. Then the meeting with the buyer fell through because the contact person left the company. Then her business partner, a Korean woman named Soo-jin who had helped her navigate everything from supplier negotiations to neighborhood politics, had quietly taken most of their shared client list and started her own competing brand, one bad thing after another, each one manageable on its own. Together, they were a flood, and now this. The visa. Gone, Amara put the letter back in her bag. She straightened her spine. She had been through worse. She reminded herself of that. But had she really? She was walking back toward the subway when her phone buzzed, a number she did not recognize. She almost ignored it. She was not in the mood for anything that required emotional bandwidth. But something made her answer. "Miss Osai," said the voice on the other end. Polite, female, precise. "My name is Park Hyunjae. I am calling on behalf of Kang Jae-hoon, the CEO of KJH Group. He would like to meet with you today if you are available." Amara stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the sidewalk while people streamed around her like a river splitting around a rock. She did not know the name Kang Jae-hoon, but she knew KJH Group. Everyone in Seoul knew KJH Group. It was one of the largest private conglomerates in the country. Fashion, real estate, entertainment. Their logo was discreet and tasteful, the way truly powerful things always are. Why, she asked carefully, would someone like him want to meet with someone like me? There was a brief pause on the line. He will explain everything in person, Miss Osai. A car will be outside your address in 1 hour. I trust that is acceptable. It was not a question. Not really. Amara looked down at the visa denial letter pressing against the side of her bag. She looked at the gray Seoul sky above her. She thought about her empty boutique, her shrinking savings. One-way flight she could not yet afford to pretend she was not already considering. She said yes. The car that arrived was black and silent and obscenely expensive. The driver did not speak. The interior smelled like leather and money and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from never having had to worry about anything. Amara sat in the back and watched the city slide past the window. She had dressed carefully. A camel wool coat she had designed herself. Simple earrings. Her natural hair pulled back. She looked professional. She felt like she was walking into something she did not fully understand. The building they pulled up to was in Gangnam. Of course it was, glass and steel climbing into the clouds. The kind of structure that said we do not need to shout about our power. We simply have it. She rode the elevator to the 32nd floor. A young woman in a charcoal blazer met her at the door and led her through an open office that was almost aggressively calm. White surfaces, soft light. People working in near silence. And then she was in a room. A conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that made everything below look manageable, small, arranged. She sat down, she waited. The door opened 3 minutes later, and he walked in. She had expected someone older, or softer, or less present. Kang Jae-hoon was none of those things. He was tall in the way that did not feel performative. Dark suit, no tie. A face that was precise and still and almost deliberately unreadable. He looked like a man who had decided, at some point in his life, that emotion was a luxury he could not afford. He sat across from her. He did not smile. He did not offer pleasantries. He looked at her with eyes that were sharp and calm and asked a single question. "How much do you need?" Amara blinked. "Excuse me." He opened a slim folder on the table. Inside it was her visa denial letter, her boutique registration, her financial statements, her business registration documents. Everything about her situation laid out with clinical precision. Her skin went cold. "You have been researching me," she said slowly. He did not deny it. "Your fashion label has potential," he said. "The concept is strong. The execution has been limited by funding and partnership issues. Your visa problem is solvable. I have been looking for a solution to a different kind of problem, a personal one." He folded his hands on the table. "My grandmother is ill. She has been asking for years to see me married before she dies. My family has been pressuring me to settle down because I am the only heir and there are inheritance complications tied to my marital status. I do not want a real wife. I do not have the time or the interest for one, but I need someone to play the role convincingly for 6 months. Someone who is educated, composed, and has no romantic expectations." Amara stared at him. "You want to pay someone to be your fake wife?" He tilted his head slightly. As if the word fake was imprecise. "A contractual arrangement," he said. "Legal, confidential, time-limited. You would receive full spousal visa status, which resolves your immigration problem immediately. You would also receive an investment of 200 million won into your business, all debts cleared, a new workspace, new supplier connections, and a monthly allowance for the duration of the contract." Silence spread through the room like water. Amara did not move. In exchange, he continued, "You would reside in my home. Attend required family and business functions as my wife. Behave convincingly in public. And when the 6 months ends, we part ways. No drama, no complications. The divorce is handled quietly." He slid a document across the table. "I had legal draw this up this morning. You can take it to your own lawyer if you want. The terms are fair." She looked down at the document. She looked up at him. "What if I say no?" He was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face, too fast to name. "Then you say no," he said. "The car will take you wherever you need to go." She picked up the document. She read every page. It took 20 minutes. He did not rush her. He did not check his phone. He simply sat there like a man who was accustomed to waiting for outcomes he had already calculated. When she finished, she set it down. She had one question. Just 6 months. Just 6 months, he confirmed. She signed. His apartment was not what she expected. She had imagined something cold and architectural. All marble and sharp corners and art chosen by someone paid to choose it. The kind of space that looks like a magazine and feels like a museum. But his penthouse in Hanamdong was warm in a specific way. Not cozy, not welcoming exactly, but the bookshelves were real, filled with actual worn-through books. There were plants, real ones, not decorative. A chess set on a side table with pieces mid-game, like someone had just walked away from it. She stood in the living room with her suitcase and looked at all of it and thought, there is more to him than he wants people to see. The housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. O with a soft face and careful eyes, showed her to her room. It was beautiful. Clean. A pale sage green that felt deliberate. A writing desk by the window overlooking the Han River. She sat on the edge of the bed after Mrs. O left and pressed her hands flat against the duvet and breathed. She had just agreed to live with a stranger for 6 months. A cold, precise, unreadable stranger who had researched her life without her knowledge. She told herself she had made the right decision. She almost believed it. The first week was archaeology. She and Jae-hoon inhabited the same space the way 2 countries share a border. Polite, functional, carefully distant. He woke early. She heard him sometimes at 5 in the morning, the low sound of his voice on a call, the smell of coffee drifting through the apartment before dawn. He came home late, sometimes after midnight. She would be in the living room reading, and he would pass through with a brief nod and disappear into his office. They ate dinner together exactly once in the first week. A meal Mrs. O had prepared. 15 minutes of mostly silence and 2 exchanged sentences about what to tell his grandmother when they visited that weekend. Amara watched him across the table. He moved carefully. Controlled. Like every gesture had been considered before it happened. He was polite but not warm. Present but not accessible. He was, she decided, lonely, not in the obvious way, not in the way that reaches out and asks for comfort. In the way that has lived inside walls for so long it no longer remembers what it wanted from the outside world. She knew better than to say that out loud. The visit to his grandmother changed something, even if neither of them named it. Grandmother Kang was 81 years old and sharper than a surgical blade. She had a small house in Jeonju that smelled of pine wood and ginger, and she wore her gray hair in a neat bun and looked at Amara with eyes that had seen decades of people trying to hide things from her. My Jaehoon brought a woman home, she said in Korean, while Jaehoon translated quietly for Amara. I thought this day would never come. Jaehoon answered his grandmother with patience and gentleness that Amara had not seen from him before. It softened something in his face, just slightly, just enough to notice. Grandmother Kang turned to Amara and switched to slow, deliberate English. You are beautiful, she said, but beauty is cheap. Are you strong? Amara held her gaze without flinching. I'm trying to be, she said honestly. The old woman studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled. Good, she said. Strong is better than beautiful. My grandson needs someone who will not fold. That night, on the drive back to Seoul, Amara sat quietly in the passenger seat while Jaehoon drove. The city lights were beginning to appear on the horizon, scattered like fallen stars. Your grandmother is remarkable, she said finally. He did not answer immediately. She used to say that love is not a feeling, he said at last, almost to himself. She said it is a decision you make every day. Even on the days when it is hard. Amara looked at his profile in the dark. Do you believe that? Silence. Long enough that she thought he would not answer. I used to think it was sentimental nonsense, he said. She waited. He did not finish the sentence, but she noticed that his hands on the steering wheel were not quite as tight as they usually were. It happened at the Cho Group Gala. 3 weeks into the arrangement, these were the events Amara had agreed to attend. The ones that required performance. She wore a gown she had designed herself, deep emerald with gold embroidery at the collar, the kind of garment that whispered before it spoke. She had done her own hair, braids coiled at the crown, and she wore a single piece of gold jewelry, a cuff her mother had given her. Jaehoon saw her before she saw him. She came down the hallway of the hotel's suite they had been given to change in, and he was standing by the window in his black suit, and when he turned and looked at her, something crossed his face that was not professional and not neutral. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then the mask was back. You look appropriate, he said. She almost laughed. They arrived together. They played the role. He kept a hand at the small of her back when they greeted his business associates. She smiled at the right moments and said the right things and felt, just slightly, the warmth of his hand through the fabric of her gown. This is just the performance, she reminded herself. This is what you agreed to, and then, his name was Tae-yong. He was an architect. He had met Amara 6 months before she even knew Jaehoon existed, at a design conference, and they had spoken for an hour about aesthetics and structure and the way space shapes feeling. He recognized her across the room. His face broke into a genuine, uncomplicated smile. Amara, he said, walking over. I did not know you would be here. She smiled back, and it was a real smile, easier and warmer than anything she had managed all evening. They fell into conversation about his new project, about her boutique, about a small gallery opening they both wanted to see. She was not flirting. She was simply comfortable. Herself. She did not realize how rarely she was simply herself in a room until that moment. What she also did not realize was that Jaehoon had been watching from across the room for 7 minutes. When he appeared beside her, his presence landed like a change in atmospheric pressure. The temperature around them shifted. He did not say anything aggressive. His voice was perfectly level when he greeted Tae-yong, perfectly polite when he shook the man's hand. But his arm went around Amara's waist. Firmly, possessively. And when he leaned down and said quietly near her ear, remember your position, his breath was warm and his jaw was tight and something in his voice was not quite controlled. Tae-yong excused himself shortly after. Amara turned to look at Jaehoon. His eyes were dark. She said nothing in the moment. She filed it away. She turned back to the room and smiled and played the role until the evening ended. But the drive home was a different kind of silence than before. This one had weight. She confronted him in the hallway of the apartment when the door had barely closed behind them. What was that? She asked. He set his keys down. His back was to her. It was appropriate behavior for a married couple at a business event. She crossed her arms. You were jealous, she said. He turned around slowly. The word hung between them like something exposed. I was maintaining appearances, he said. That is what we agreed to. It did not look like maintenance, she said. It looked personal. He said nothing. The silence went on long enough that she almost let it go, but she had never been good at letting things go. What is this to you? She asked, and her voice was quieter now. Honest. Because to me it is a contract, a business arrangement. That is what you said. 6 months, no feelings, no complications. But you just grabbed me in the middle of a room full of people and told me to remember my position. That is not professional. That is something else. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. And then he said quietly, I do not know what it is yet. She had not expected that. She had expected a deflection, a correction, a coldly delivered reminder of the terms, not that. She did not know what to do with the honesty of it. She went to bed. She stared at the ceiling for 2 hours. She did not sleep until almost 3 in the morning. After the gala, something changed. It was subtle. She might have missed it if she had not already learned to pay attention to the spaces in between with him. He started coming home earlier. Not early, not exactly. But where he had been returning at midnight, now it was 10, sometimes 9. He would come in and she would hear him moving through the kitchen, and sometimes, without any announcement, he would appear in the living room doorway and say, Mrs. O made too much food if you have not eaten. It was not an invitation. Not quite. But she always went. They ate at the kitchen island instead of the formal table. Easier, less ceremonial. The conversation was slow at first, careful, like two people testing the ice before they trust it. He asked about her work. Not politely, not as a formality. With actual curiosity. He asked about the design philosophy behind her brand, about why she had chosen to root it in Yoruba textile traditions, about what she saw when she looked at a piece of fabric, what she was trying to say. Nobody here has ever asked me that, she said one night. They always ask what the market is, what the demographic is, what the price point should be. He was quiet for a moment. Those questions matter, he said, but they are not the first questions. She looked at him across the island. He was looking at his coffee. There was something in his expression that was almost uncomfortable. Like he had said more than he intended. You think about more than business, she said. He glanced up. Is that surprising? She tilted her head. A little, she admitted. You work very hard at making people think otherwise. He did not deny it. That, she was learning, was one of his patterns. He would not confirm things, but he would stop denying them. And in the silence of that non-denial, something like truth would settle. She found the chess set one evening when he was still at work. She sat at the side table and studied the board. The game mid-play. White was losing. But there was a sequence, she could see it. 2 moves that could completely reverse the situation. She moved the pieces. When he came home that night and passed through the living room, he stopped. He looked at the board, then at her. She was pretending to read. You play, he asked. My father taught me, she said. He said chess is the only honest game because the board never lies. Jae-hoon sat down on the opposite side of the board. White was losing, he said, I know. But it does not have to. He studied the new positions she had placed the pieces in. He was quiet for a long time. If White plays this, he said finally, indicating a knight, then Black responds here. And White is back where they started. She leaned forward. No, she said, because then White does this. She moved. He countered. She countered again. They played for 2 hours. Neither of them acknowledged how late it was getting. Neither of them acknowledged that this had not been part of any agreement. She won. He sat back in his chair and looked at the board. There was something on his face that she had not seen there before, something that looked almost like delight. You are dangerous, he said. She smiled. You were not expecting competition. He looked at her with those careful, precise eyes. No, he said quietly. I was not. She found it by accident. She was not snooping. She needed a document she had left in his office by mistake, a receipt she needed to scan and forward to her accountant. He had said she could use his desk if she needed it. The desk drawer was already open. Just slightly, inside, paperclip to a folder. Was a photograph. She would not have looked. She was not that kind of person. But the woman in the photograph was wearing a gown almost identical to one Amara had designed 18 months ago. A limited piece. She had only made 3 of them. She picked up the photograph. The woman was Korean, beautiful, standing beside a younger Jae-hoon at what looked like a formal dinner. They were not touching, but there was something in the way the space between them held, something intimate and careful. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting that was not Jae-hoon's, Jae-hoon and Seo-yeon 2 years before, Amara set the photograph back exactly where she had found it. She found her receipt. She left the office. She closed the door behind her, but she could not stop thinking about that name, Seo-yeon, and the way the photograph had been kept, not archived, not put away, kept in a drawer someone opens regularly. That evening at dinner, she was quieter than usual. Jae-hoon noticed. He always noticed things. That was something she had learned about him. He was not emotionally expressive, but he was acutely observant. He saw more than he let on. Are you unwell? He asked. I am fine, she said. Just tired. He accepted that. He did not push, but later, when she was already in her room, there was a knock on her door. She opened it. He was holding a cup of the ginger tea she had mentioned once in passing that she drank when she could not sleep. She had mentioned it once. 3 weeks ago, he had remembered. She took the cup. She looked up at him. "There are things about you," she said carefully, "that contradict the image you present." He held her gaze. "Everyone has those," he said. She wanted to ask about Seoyeon. She wanted to ask what had happened between them. She wanted to understand the photograph in the drawer. Instead, she said, "Thank you for the tea." And he nodded once and left. She drank the tea in the dark and thought about people who keep photographs in drawers and call that letting go. The call came from a journalist. It was a Thursday morning. Amara was at her new workspace, the one funded by the agreement, when her phone lit up with an unknown number. She answered it out of habit. "Miss Osai," the voice said. "We are running a piece on KJH Group. We have information suggesting that Kang Jae-hoon entered into a paid contractual arrangement disguised as a marriage in order to avoid inheritance clauses. A source close to the matter provided documentation. We wanted to get your comment before publication." She sat very still. The room around her continued on, her assistant talking in the background, fabric samples spread across the table, the city visible through the glass wall. She said, "I have no comment," and she hung up. Her hands were shaking slightly. She looked at her phone. She thought about who could have given a journalist that information. Who knew about the contract? Who had access to the kind of documentation they were describing? The answer came to her slowly, and then all at once. There was only one person outside of Jae-hoon's lawyer and his assistant who had been given any documentation about the arrangement in writing. Soo-jin, her former business partner, the woman who had taken her client list. The woman who, Amara now remembered, had connections in Korean media through her new investor. The woman who, if the arrangement became public scandal, would potentially benefit from Amara's credibility collapse. She had not told Soo-jin directly. But in the weeks before the contract, when Amara had been desperate and reaching out to anyone she knew, she had mentioned she was exploring a major business opportunity. She had mentioned a name. She had not meant to. It had slipped. And Soo-jin had asked questions that Amara had answered without fully thinking about what she was saying. She drove to Jae-hoon's office. She did not call ahead. She walked through the lobby and up to his floor and past his assistant, who stood up and said, "You cannot go in there," and Amara said, "Watch me," and opened the door. Jae-hoon was in a meeting with 4 men in suits who all turned and looked at her. He looked at her face. He dismissed the room immediately. She told him everything. The call. The journalist. Soo-jin. The information she had accidentally let slip. She told it flatly, without embellishment. She was not going to add drama to a situation that already had enough. When she finished, he was quiet. His jaw was tight. "This could go public," he said. "Before I have the chance to manage it." "I know," she said. "I am sorry. I did not intend to compromise this." He looked at her. "Do you believe that is why I am upset?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" He stood up. He moved to the window. He had his back to her and she could see the tension across his shoulders. "If this goes public," he said, his voice low, "it will not just be inconvenient for the inheritance arrangement. It will affect your business, your visa status, your reputation. You will be painted as someone who sold a relationship for money and a work permit." She had not thought of it that way. She had been thinking about what it would cost him. She had forgotten to think about what it would cost her. He turned back around. "I will have my team handle it," he said. "We will get ahead of it." "But I need you to trust me on the strategy." She looked at him. "Why do you care?" she asked. "About my reputation." "The contract protects your interests. If this goes public, you can simply terminate the arrangement early and walk away with minimal damage. I am the one with more to lose." He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you are not just a contract to me anymore," he said. The words landed quietly. No drama attached to them. Just the plain truth of it, sitting in the room between them. She did not know what to say. He turned back to his desk and picked up his phone and said, "I am going to call my legal team." "Go home. I will be there by 7. She left. She sat in the car and stared at nothing. "You are not just a contract to me anymore." She pressed her fingers to her sternum like she was checking for something. Something was there. Something new and terrifying and entirely inconvenient. She drove home. She sat in her room until 7. She heard his key in the door exactly when he said he would be home. The journalist never published. Jae-hoon's team moved with the kind of speed and quiet efficiency that comes from having power and knowing how to use it without being loud about it. A different story ran in the same publication 2 days later, unrelated. Soo-jin, Amara learned later through a mutual contact, had been quietly cut off from her new investor following an unrelated compliance issue with her brand registration. Amara did not ask Jae-hoon what he had done or how. She suspected she did not want to know the details. What she did know was that he had protected her. Not because the contract required it, but because he chose to. That distinction mattered. The days after that were different. Something had shifted between them, not dramatically. Not with a declaration or a scene, but the walls were lower. The careful choreography of their daily arrangement was looser, more honest. He began to do small things. When she worked late at the studio, a meal would arrive. Not from a delivery service, from Mrs. O, which meant he had called home and asked. He saved her a book from a reading list he was going through. Left it on the kitchen island with a note that said, "You mentioned being interested in this author." It was his handwriting, sparse and precise, and she stood there holding the book for a full minute before she put it on her shelf. When she had a particularly brutal day, when a potential retailer she had been courting for weeks suddenly passed on her collection, she came home and sat on the living room floor with her sketchbook, not drawing, just holding it, because it was the thing she did when she needed to feel like herself again. He found her there when he came home. He did not ask what happened. He did not try to fix it. He sat down on the floor beside her. He was still in his suit. He leaned back against the sofa and stretched his legs out and picked up the chess magazine from the table and opened it, just present. Just there, she had never had someone sit with her like that, without noise, without pressure, without needing her to manage their concern for her. After a while she said, "I lost a retailer today." He said, "Tell me about them. Not I am sorry. Not it will be okay." Not what happened, tell me about them, like her work mattered, like the details of her professional life were worth knowing, so she told him and he listened. And then he said that retailer works with 4 Korean brands who all have the same aesthetic signature. Your work does not fit that aesthetic. That is not a failure. That is a mismatch. There is a difference. She looked at him. He was looking at the chess magazine, but he was not reading it. "You know my aesthetic," she said. He paused for just a moment. "I have been following your brand since before I approached you," he said. "That is why I chose you, not just for the visa arrangement. I thought your business had a real future. I wanted to invest in something that did." She felt something twist softly in her chest. She looked back at her sketchbook. "Why did you not just offer me funding from the start?" she asked quietly. Without the marriage arrangement, silence. "Long enough to feel deliberate, because then you would have been a business contact," he said. "And I would have had no reason to bring you into my life." She did not look at him. She was afraid that if she looked at him, she would do something she could not take back. She turned a page in her sketchbook and said nothing, but she was smiling. Quietly. Into the page. They visited grandmother Kang again at the 3-month mark. This time the visit was different. The old woman was frailer than before, though her eyes were no less sharp. She sat in her favorite chair by the window and watched Jae-hoon and Amara with a kind of focused attention that Amara was beginning to understand was the old woman's primary language. After lunch, when Jae-hoon was outside taking a call, grandmother Kang looked at Amara and said in her careful English, "How long have you been in love with him?" Amara's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "We are," she began. Grandmother Kang waved her hand, not dismissively, patiently. "The way you wave away a response you already know is not the truth. I am old," the woman said, "not stupid. I have watched people in love my entire life. It looks different from people pretending to be in love." "You are not pretending. Not anymore." Amara set her cup down. "It is complicated," she said. Grandmother Kang tilted her head. "Love is always complicated," she said. "But that is not a reason to refuse it. That is only a reason to be brave." Amara looked at the window. Jae-hoon was visible in the garden, his phone to his ear, his other hand in his pocket. Even from a distance, he moved like someone who had forgotten how to be at rest. She wanted to tell the old woman the truth. The full truth. The contract, the arrangement, the 6 months that had somehow turned into something neither of them had negotiated. She did not tell her. But she thought the old woman already knew. When Jae-hoon came back inside, he looked between them with the expression of someone who suspects he has missed a significant conversation. Grandmother Kang simply smiled and changed the subject. But on the drive back to Seoul, Jae-hoon was quieter than usual. He drove with one hand on the wheel and his elbow on the window ledge, and he did not look at her. After about 40 minutes, he said, "What did she say to you?" Amara kept her eyes forward. "She told me I was brave," she said. Which was not technically a lie. He nodded slowly. "She says that to people she has decided to trust," he said. Amara looked at him. He was still watching the road. She only said it to 2 people before you, he said. My mother. And my previous. He stopped. And then he said nothing more. But Amara heard the sentence that had not been finished. Seoyeon. She was certain of it. She wanted to ask. She wanted to finally say the name out loud and let it land between them and be real. Instead, she watched the road and waited and let the silence hold its shape. He told her about Seoyeon on a night when neither of them had planned to talk about anything significant. It was late. They had been playing chess again. She had won again, though this time by a narrower margin than before, and he had refilled her glass of wine without being asked, and she had thanked him, and they had sat for a moment in the easy quiet that was becoming natural between them. And then he said, "You have seen the photograph." She went still. It was not a question. She thought about denying it. She was not someone who liked being caught with information that was not hers. But she was also not a liar. "Yes," she said. He looked at his glass. "Seoyeon and I were together for 4 years," he said. "We met in university. She was a designer too, actually, interior spaces. She had a way of seeing rooms as emotional experiences. I always thought that was extraordinary." He paused. "What happened?" Amara asked. "Gently, the company," he said. "When my father had his stroke and I had to take over KJH Group, I was 26. The company was in a difficult position. I worked 16, 17 hours a day for 3 years. I missed everything, her exhibitions, her birthdays. The small things she tried to tell me mattered." He stopped. She waited. "One morning she left a letter on the kitchen table," he said. "It said she did not want to love someone who was not available to be loved. That she hoped I would find someone one day for whom I could be present." The room was quiet. She did not leave angry. Amara asked. "No," he said. "That was the hardest part. She left with kindness. She still sends a card on my grandmother's birthday every year because she knows my grandmother loved her." He turned his glass slowly on the table. "After that, I decided it was not fair to bring someone into my life," he said. "Not until I had learned how to be present again. And then I was 31 and the inheritance situation became pressing, and I told myself, better a temporary arrangement. Better no real expectations." He looked at her. Amara held his gaze. "And then you," he said simply. She did not know what to say. She felt like she was standing on a threshold and the door was open and all she had to do was step through it. But she was afraid. Not of him. Of what it would mean to want something real from a situation she had entered with both eyes open, knowing it was temporary. She picked up her wine glass. "I understand why you did what you did," she said carefully. "But I think Seoyeon was right about one thing." He waited. "If you are present for something," she said, "it changes. Even when you did not plan for it to." He was very still. She finished her wine. She stood up. She said good night and she went to her room. She sat against the door in the dark for a long time, her heart doing something unruly in her chest. She heard him on the other side of the apartment, moving slowly. Eventually, stillness. She thought, this is becoming something neither of us signed for. She thought, I am in serious trouble. It was the 5th month when everything broke open. The investment in her brand had been building steadily. A buyer from a prominent department store had confirmed interest. 2 Korean fashion blogs had run features. A small pop-up she had done in Itaewon had sold out in a single afternoon. She was building something real. And the arrangement was almost over. She had not let herself think about that directly. She had been managing it the way you manage something you cannot bear to look at straight on. Peripherally, carefully. But the calendar did not care about careful. One evening Jae-hoon came home with a folder. He set it on the kitchen island. She looked at it. Inside was the preliminary dissolution paperwork. The divorce filing, as agreed, structured to appear as a mutual, amicable separation due to lifestyle incompatibilities. He sat across from her. "The lawyers say we can begin the process now," he said, "so that it is finalized before the 6 months technically ends. Cleaner that way." She looked at the papers. She looked at them for a long time, and she thought, this is what you agreed to. "This is exactly what you agreed to," she said, of course, and she reached for the papers. His hand covered hers before she could pick them up. She looked at him. He was looking at their hands. His jaw was tight. The way it had been at the gala, when he had seen her laughing with Taeyong, when something beneath his control had pushed through. He did not move his hand. She did not move hers. "What are we doing?" she asked quietly. He did not answer. She looked at him. Really looked. At the lines of tension in his face. At the controlled, careful mask he wore over everything that moved beneath it. "Jae-hoon," she said, his name in her voice. He closed his eyes, just briefly. Like it hurt. She had never called him by his name without the formality before. "Tell me what this is," she said. "Tell me honestly." Because I cannot sign these papers and go back to pretending this was only a transaction and be okay with that. I need to know if I am the only one who is not okay. The silence stretched. It stretched until she thought she had miscalculated everything. Until she thought she had broken something by asking. And then he said quietly, "You are not the only one," she exhaled. She said, "Then what do we do?" He opened his eyes. He looked at her. "I do not know," he said. "I have never been here before. Not like this." "Neither of us has," she said. The folder sat on the island between them. Neither of them touched it. Mrs. O appeared in the kitchen doorway, took one look at the room, made a noise that was entirely noncommittal, and disappeared back around the corner. Amara almost laughed. Jae-hoon looked at her face. His expression shifted into something she had never seen from him in full. Something open, unguarded, frightened almost, in the way that people are frightened when they want something too much. He said, "I do not want to sign those papers." She said, "Then let us not." If the story ended there, it would have been enough. But life does not stop for the moment you decide to be brave. 3 days later, his father came back. Elder Kang had been in Japan for the past 2 months, recovering from a secondary health complication following his stroke. He returned to Seoul unannounced, the way powerful men always do, as if the world ought to have been expecting them. He came to the penthouse. He shook Amara's hand with the formal politeness of a man who had already decided what he thought and was simply observing protocol. He took Jae-hoon into the study. Amara sat in the living room and could not hear the words, but she could hear the tone of it through the wall. Jae-hoon's father spoke in low, controlled sentences that still somehow carried force. Jae-hoon responded. The rhythm was familiar, an old argument, a practiced terrain. When Jae-hoon came out, his face was the mask again. His father followed behind him. Elder Kang looked at Amara with the particular expression of a man who has run calculations and arrived at an unsatisfying result. He said in Korean to Jae-hoon with Amara sitting right there. This arrangement was supposed to be temporary. "I hope you have not forgotten that." Jae-hoon said nothing. He looked at his father. Then he looked at Amara. And then he said in English, clearly and without any ambiguity whatsoever, "This is no longer temporary." His father's expression tightened. He looked at Amara as if seeing her properly for the first time. She met his gaze without flinching. Elder Kang said nothing more. He left. The apartment was very quiet after the door closed. Amara stood up. She walked to Jae-hoon. She said, "You did not have to do that." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "Your father is not pleased," she said. "No," he said. "This will be complicated," she said. He looked at her then with that new expression, the open one, the real one. "Most things worth keeping are," he said. But love, when it has been built on something temporary, has a particular kind of fragility. And Amara had not told him everything. She had not told him that 3 weeks ago, before the dissolution papers, before the conversation in the kitchen, before everything changed, she had applied for a new business opportunity. In Lagos. A collaboration with a Pan-African luxury collective that had been courting her for months, before Seoul had started to feel like home. Before the evenings on the kitchen island and the chess games and the cup of ginger tea left at her door, before him, she had applied. And she had been accepted. And the confirmation had arrived, quietly on a Thursday afternoon, while she was sitting in her studio and trying to figure out what her life was going to look like now that she was choosing to stay. Except she had already said yes to Lagos. She sat with this for 4 days. She told herself she would tell him. She told herself she would explain it. She told herself they would figure it out together. But the fear was louder than the plan. What if staying was only possible because the contract gave them a structure? What if, without the framework of the arrangement, what they had was not strong enough to hold the weight of a real life? What if she gave up the Lagos opportunity for a man who had, just 3 months ago, been prepared to hand her dissolution papers without blinking? What if she was building a home in a place where she had always known she might not stay? She made the worst possible decision. She did not tell him. She packed a bag. One bag, she left a signed paper on the kitchen island. Not the dissolution papers. A letter. Short and inadequate and honest in a way that was also cowardly. She wrote, "I am afraid of what this is becoming, and I do not know how to ask for something I was never supposed to want. This was always supposed to be temporary. I do not know how to make it permanent without breaking something in both of us. I am sorry." She left at 5 in the morning when the apartment was still dark and quiet, and Mrs. O had not yet arrived and Jae-hoon was still asleep. She did not look back from the elevator. She did not trust herself if she did. Lagos in May was loud and golden and alive in ways that Seoul was not. She fell back into it like a woman returning to her first language. The heat on her skin, The noise that was familiar rather than foreign. Her mother's cooking. Her sister's laugh. Her old neighborhood with its complicated, beloved chaos. She kept herself busy. She threw herself into the Lagos collaboration with the kind of intensity that was really just grief with a productive mask on. She did not think about him. She thought about him constantly. She thought about the chessboard, about the ginger tea, about the night he had sat on the floor beside her because she needed someone to be present, and he had somehow, without being asked, known how to do that. She thought about his voice saying, "You are not just a contract to me anymore." She thought about the dissolution papers he could not bring himself to hand her. She worked late. She designed. She attended meetings and gave presentations and smiled at the right moments. And at night she sat on her family's terrace and looked at the Lagos skyline and let herself feel the size of what she had left behind. 3 weeks passed. She was in her office, a rented studio space in the Lekki district, reviewing fabric samples, when her assistant knocked on the open door. "There is a man outside," her assistant said, looking slightly uncertain. "He says he does not have an appointment. He says his name is Kang Jae-hoon." Amara looked up from the fabric. Her assistant added carefully, "He has been standing outside for 40 minutes. He would not come in without your permission." She sat very still 40 minutes. Outside, in Lagos heat. In, she was certain, a suit. She set the fabric down. "Send him in," she said. He did not look like the CEO of anything. He looked like a man who had crossed continents on a sleepless impulse and had not once stopped to reconsider it. His jacket was wrinkled. His tie was loosened. His eyes were tired and certain in equal measure. He stood in the door of her studio and looked at her across the room. She stood up. She crossed her arms, not in anger. "In self-protection, you came to Lagos," she said. "Yes," he said. "How did you find the dress?" He paused. "Your sister was more helpful than you might have hoped." "Of course she was." She looked at him. He looked at her. "You left," he said. "Without telling me why. I wrote a letter." "I read the letter," he said. "I have read it many times. And it is," he said carefully, "the most honest piece of cowardice I have ever read." She blinked. She almost argued. But he was right and she knew it, and arguing it would just be more of the same. "I was afraid," she said. "So was I," he said. "But I did not leave." "No," she said quietly. "You did not." He moved into the room, not quickly, deliberately. Giving her space to tell him to stop. She did not tell him to stop. He stopped in front of her. She had to look up to see his face. He had always been taller than she let herself think about. He said, "I have spent 5 years keeping everyone at a distance because it was easier than being present. You walked into my apartment with one suitcase and a stubborn spine, and you rearranged everything. You sat on my floor and played chess with me, and you looked at my grandmother and told her you were trying to be strong, and she loved you instantly, and she has never loved anyone instantly. You made my house feel like somewhere I actually wanted to come home to." He stopped. He looked at her like she was the only fixed point in a room that was shifting. "I am not here as Mr. Kang," he said. "I am not here as a CEO or a party to any arrangement. I am here as the man who cannot sleep because the apartment is too quiet and the chessboard is in the same position you left it because I could not bring myself to move the pieces." She was not going to cry. She was absolutely not going to cry. "Jae-hoon," she said. He looked at her. "This is not going to be simple," she said. "I have commitments here. My business is growing in 2 directions now, Seoul and Lagos. Long distance between those 2 cities is brutal. I have 12 offices in 11 countries," he said quietly. "I am familiar with distance." She almost smiled. "Your father does not approve of me," she said. "My father does not approve of anything that was not his idea," he said. "I have been handling my father since I was 26. I am quite good at it." She looked at him. He looked at her. She uncrossed her arms. "You flew to Lagos," she said. He nodded. "In that suit." He looked down at himself. A small, surprised expression, like he had entirely forgotten. "Apparently," he said. She pressed her lips together to hold back the laugh that wanted out. Then she looked at him one more time. At the tired, certain, wrecked, open face of the man who had sat on his kitchen floor because she was sad, and kept a photograph in a drawer and called it moving on, and told his father this is no longer temporary and meant every syllable. She said, "I am not saying too late." He exhaled. Like he had been holding it since Lagos airport. "I am saying this is going to require actual work," she said. "From both of us, I know," he said, "and I will need you to actually talk to me when things are hard. Not go quiet and expect me to read the space between the words." He nodded. "And she said, will need to stop running when I am afraid." She held out her hand. He looked at it. Then he looked at her face. He took her hand. He held it with the same particular grip from the night at the gala, the night this had all begun to unravel into something real. Firm, certain. Like letting go was not an option he was entertaining. She thought of his grandmother's words. Love is a decision you make every day. Even on the days when it is hard. She thought, I am making this decision. She thought, I think I have been making it for a long time. 6 months later, Amara opened her first dual flagship boutique. Seoul and Lagos, both in the same week. The Seoul launch was in a gallery space in Hanamdong, 3 blocks from the apartment she had left in the dark of morning with a single suitcase and a cowardly letter. She stood in the center of the room on launch night and watched people move through the collection, the fabrics her hands had shaped, the story she had been trying to tell since she first arrived in a country that did not yet speak her language. Jae-hoon was there, not in the center of the room. He had never been someone who stood in the center of rooms. He was at the edge, watching, his hands in his pockets. His jacket this time was not wrinkled. He caught her eye across the room. He smiled, not the controlled, professional expression she had first catalogued. The real one. The one she had found under all the layers of careful distance. Rare and quiet and worth everything it had taken to get here. Grandmother Kang, who had insisted on attending despite the hour and the travel, reached up and patted Amara's arm. This, the old woman said, gesturing at the room, at the collection, at Jae-hoon across the space, at all of it together. This is what I was waiting to see. What were you waiting for? Amara asked. Him, the old woman said simply. Being present. Amara looked at Jae-hoon. He was already looking back. The contract had ended 6 months ago. What had replaced it had no expiration date. No terms, no signatures. Just 2 people who had walked into a temporary arrangement and built, accidentally and stubbornly and against every plan either of them had made, something permanent. The kind of thing you do not need a contract for. The kind you choose every day, even on the days when it is hard.